1865. The Civil War ended. Enslaved, they gained their freedom, but the weight of the currents still marked the memory of each man and woman released. In the midst of this transition, a former slave called Charlotte Scott made an unexpected decision: donate the first gains from your free work to build a monument, a symbol not only of victory over slavery, but of the hope of a future. Charlotte's gesture would echo to Washington, inspiring the Emancipation Monument, inaugurated years later in the presence of abolitionists and veterans of the war. This story begins with a simple donation, but has become a landmark of collective memory of the United States. From where you are today, can you imagine giving up your first free salary to honor the struggle of millions? If you believe Charlotte Scott's courage deserves to be remembered, subscribe to the channel and comment. Was it just a former slave grateful, or a visionary who wanted to eternalize freedom in stone and bronze? In 1865, the air was loaded with almost palpable tension, a mixture of hope and fear, while cannons finally silenced and the American Civil War reached their bloody end. For Charlotte Scott and millions of others who, like her, had endured the brutality of slavery, the sound of post-war silence was no longer a foreshadowing of whipped or shouted commands, but an empty space, ready to be filled with the echoes of uncertain freedom. The words of the 13th Amendment, which had formally abolished slavery in the United States, vibrated with promises, but also with the bitter reality that freedom would not immediately equivalent to justice or equality. As the dust rests on a battlefield where so many lives had been reaped, Charlotte, a woman of erect posture and resolute look, walked through the wreckage of the past, the bare feet feeling the ground for the shadow of trees that had already seen indescribable horrors. Emancipation had been proclaimed, but the horrors of slavery persisted in the form of physical and emotional scars, marks that would not be erased with the signing of a document. Society was at a point of inflection. In the corridors of power, men of suit discussed the details of the future of the nation, while on the streets the newly liberated tried to understand what would mean living without the currents that had trapped them for so long. For many, freedom meant to wander through lands that did not welcome them, in search of work, family, and a sense of identity long denied. Poverty was a constant shadow, while now less institutionalized persecution still manifested in insidious and violent ways. Charlotte, who had been torn from her childhood and thrown into the cruelty of forced labor, now had the chance to sculpt her own destiny in her hands. But these hands, calling on incessant work, were now empty of everything except for their own determination. She had heard rumors of opportunity in northern cities, places where her story could be rewritten with a little less pain. However, she also knew that every step towards this new life would be a fight against the memories of the past and the obstacles of the present. The country, although technically united, was deeply divided. The fall of the Confederation had not erased racism and discrimination, only made them more complex. Charlotte and her fellow men were in a nation that still needed to decide what to do with them. Some saw former slaves as potential citizens, while others insisted on treating them as subhumans. The South, devastated by war, was particularly resistant to accept that those who were once seen as property now walked by his side as equals. While Charlotte settled in a small community of former Slavics, she found a support network on family and unknown faces, people united by a common struggle, intertwined stories of suffering and resistance. They gathered around bonfires at night, sharing stories, hopes, and plans. For many, music was a consolation, a reminder of a home that might never have known, but they felt in each rated note. Despite the difficulties, there was a quiet determination in Charlotte. She knew that the struggle for true freedom and equality would be long, but was willing to face her. His experience had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move on despite him. And so, with each dawn, she got up, ready to face a new day, a new challenge, with her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the promise of a better future shone with the intensity of renewed hope. Amid the vastness of the Virginia fields, where the sun punished the earth and men, Charlotte S.C. Ott was born in a world of shackles and submission. The childhood that should have been full of innocence and joke was soon devoured by the brutal reality of slavery. His early years were marked by long working hours in the fields, where small hands learned the weight of cotton and whipping of the whip. Charlotte's life, like so many others, was an endless sequence of indistinguishable days, where the sun was born and set on an always equal, but never free horizon. At the age of 9, Charlotte had already experienced the pain of separation, seeing her mother taken to a distant plantation, leaving behind only the memory of a tight hug and silent tears. This absence shaped its determination and resilience, an inner force that will grow with it in each step, in every breath suffocated under oppression. Although his youth years were stolen, Charlotte carried an indomitable spirit within him, a force that even the heaviest shackles could suffocate completely. When the news of the proclamation of emancipation came, brought in whispers by those who dared to dream of freedom, Charlotte was determined not only to break free, but also to honor those who had suffered and fallen along the way. The collective memory of his people, their pains and their hopes were a flame that burned intensely in their hearts. She knew that freedom could not be true without justice, without recognition, and without a perennial memory of those who had paved her way with blood and tears. Charlotte's decision to move north to Ohio was driven not only for the search for a new life, but for a bigger mission. In his mind, he hovered the image of a monument, a tribute to those who had lived and died in captivity, a symbol of resistance and hope for future generations. She believed that while slavery could be abolished on paper, true change would require recognition and education so that the scars of history were not forgotten but transformed into learning and growth. The transition to life in Ohio was not easy. Prejudice and racism still permeated society, and newly liberated often faced discrimination and hostility. However, Charlotte found strength in the community that welcomed her. Between church walls and clandestine meetings, she connected with others who shared her desire for change. Together, they traced plans, raised their voices, and worked tirelessly to build a better future. Charlotte stood out as a natural leader, guiding her people with words of hope and courage. She used her gift for oratory in discourses that inspired and mobilized, always emphasizing the importance of education and unity. With each word, she evoked the memory of those who had been erased by the story, ensuring that their voices echo over time. It was during one of these meetings that Charlotte met Thomas Ball, a renowned sculptor who became sensitized with his cause. Inspired by his passion and determination, he pledged to create the Monument of Emancipation, a sculpture that would celebrate the liberation of enslaved and recognize the continuous struggle for equality. This monument would not only be a work of art, but a living testimony of the contributions and sacrifices of those who had been enslaved. Charlotte's work did not end with the creation of the monument. She continued to fight for justice and equality, dedicating her life to educate and empower others. Its history became a legend, a source of inspiration for those who sought justice in a world that often seemed unfair. Today, Charlotte Scott is remembered not only as a woman who lived in a time of transition, but as a tireless warrior whose legacy continues to inspire those who fight for freedom and dignity. Your life is a testimony of the power of determination and the lasting impact that a single person may have in refusing to forget, by refusing to give up. In 1865, the summer heat in Ohio made the air seem palpable, almost suffocating, while Charlotte Scott walked the streets of Cincinnati. She had woken up early, as usual, and went to her new workplace, a small laundry that had given her the first job opportunity as a free woman. The city was in a constant frenzy, with people moving quickly, in an attempt to rebuild their lives in a post-war world. Charlotte, however, walked with the serenity of those who carried in her heart the certainty of a much greater purpose. The laundry bell tangled when she entered, greeted by the familiar sound of clothes being rubbed and boiling water vapors rising in the air. Moisture and heat were intense, but she felt grateful for every drop of sweat that dripped from her heat tests, for each of them symbolized a step towards freedom and independence. Charlotte had promised herself that she would never be subdued again, and with determination she was dedicated to work, bending and passing clothes with precision and care. Each day of work was a small victory, a reminder that she was shaping her own destiny. However, what motivated her most was the image of a monument she had dreamed of lifting, a tribute to those who had been enslaved, and President Abraham Lincoln, whose signature on paper had changed the course of history. Charlotte knew that the construction of this monument would be a powerful symbol of recognition and gratitude, a perennial memory of the struggle for freedom. Finally, the day came when Charlotte would receive her first payment. That day, as the sun was put, Dyeing the sky with orange and purple, she walked to the manager's office. Charlotte's heart was hitting her chest, not nervous, but of excitement. When the envelope with his payment was delivered to his hands, she held him for a moment, feeling the symbolic weight he carried. For many, that money could mean a hot meal or new clothes, but for Charlotte, it was the realization of a dream. Instead of using payment for her needs, Charlotte made a decision that many could find surprising. At the dawn the next day, she headed for a small community meeting where her journey companions were looking forward to. With a serene smile on his face, Charlotte announced her intention to donate her entire salary to the construction of the monument to emancipation. His words were received with astonished silence, followed by murmurs of admiration and respect. "This monument," she declared, in a firm and emotion-filled voice, "it is not just about honoring Lincoln, but of recognizing the strength and resilience of all who have suffered, all who struggled, all of us who now walk towards a brighter future." His eyes traveled the group, capturing the attention and hearts of all present. "It's a promise that we will never forget where we came from, and that we will continue to fight for justice and equality for everyone." Charlotte's generosity deeply touched the community. His donation was seen as an act of love and resistance, a statement that freedom could not be complete without the memory of those who paved the way with their lives. The news of his donation soon spread, inspiring others to contribute similarly. Thus, Charlotte's vision began to take shape, stone by stone, supported by the unity and determination of a people who refused to be forgotten. While the monument came to life, Charlotte continued her laundry work, but now each day she brought a new kind of satisfaction. She saw the impact of her actions on the surrounding community, and that filled her with hope. Night conversations around the bonfires were now filled with plans and dreams of a future where equality would not be just aspiration, but a reality. Charlotte Scott's legacy, fueled by her first salary, grew beyond her own expectations. The monument would not only be a stone structure, but a headlight of hope for future generations, a reminder that true freedom can only be achieved when everyone is remembered and celebrated. And so, with each passing day, Charlotte continued his journey, guided by the light of a promise that refused to erase. Amid the growing fervor of the city of Cincinnati, Charlotte Scott's gesture echoed as a strong breath of hope and determination. His act of generosity crossed the borders of his small community, reaching the ears of abolitionist leaders and veterans of the Union, whose hearts were already in tune with the melody of justice and freedom. It was not long before Charlotte's name became synonymous with courage and inspiration, a flame that lit new fireworks wherever it went. Abolitionist leaders, men and women who had dedicated their lives to the struggle for freedom, were deeply touched by Charlotte's donation. They saw in that gesture not only the manifestation of a personal desire, but the collective expression of a people who longed for recognition and dignity. Among them was Frederick Douglass, a prominent figure of the abolitionist movement, whose words had the power to move mountains. Douglass, hearing Charlotte's story, decided that she couldn't get her arms crossed. He organized a series of events to raise funds, inviting all those who shared the dream of seeing a monument erected that symbolized true emancipation. The city then became a stage of fervent encounters, where debates and speeches echoed in squares and halls. All over the social spheres gathered to hear the inflamed words of the speakers, who, in their lines, evoked the painful images of slavery, but also painted vibrant colors the promise of a better future. The Union veterans, who had bravely fought on the battlefields, remembered the physical and emotional scars they carried, and saw Charlotte's cause an opportunity to give new meaning to their sacrifices. The collection campaigns took a proportion that no one could have predicted. Artists, writers, and politicians joined the cause, contributing to works, discourses, and donations. The city was alive with the energy of a community united by a greater purpose. Charlotte, though humble, was at the center of this whirlwind, her voice resonating as a symbol of hope and resilience. His speeches were simple, but loaded with emotion and truth, deeply touching each heart present. While donations increased, the monument project gained shape. Thomas Ball, the sculptor who had committed himself to Charlotte's vision, worked tirelessly on his studio. Each chisel blow was guided not only by its artistic ability, but for the weight of the story he wanted to capture in stone. He knew that this work would not be just a tribute to President Lincoln, but a tribute to all who had suffered and fought for freedom. The monument, throughout its creation stages, has become a point of convergence for the community. People came from afar to see the progress of the work, to touch the stone that would soon represent more than simple freedom, but a recognition of the value and contribution of an entire people. Charlotte was present on each visit, her firm and proud look following every detail that emerged under Ball's skillful hands. As the monument took shape, the collection campaigns continued to inspire a growing movement. Charlotte Scott's echo reverberated far beyond Ohio's limits, reaching neighboring states and even the nation's capital. In Washington, D.C., politicians began to realize the importance of what was at stake. The construction of the monument has become a national symbol, a catalyst for broader discussions about civil rights and the true integration of newly released in American society. Charlotte's dedication and the support she received became a living example that the struggle for justice and equality was not just a matter of politics, but of humanity. Each contribution, every speech, every stone placed in the monument was one step toward a world where freedom and dignity were not privileges of few, but inalienable rights of all. On the day of the monument's inauguration, the city of Cincinnati was in celebration. People from all over the country met to witness the culmination of a dream that had begun with a simple gesture of generosity. Charlotte, surrounded by friends, leaders, and supporters, saw her dream turn into reality. The monument to emancipation was majestic against heaven, its forms capturing the history and hope of a people who refused to be forgotten. That day did not mark the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new era. Charlotte Scott, with her heart full of gratitude and hope, continued to fight for justice, knowing that the monument was more than stone and metal. It was a perennial reminder that true freedom could only be achieved when everyone was remembered and celebrated. And so his story intertwined with so many others, becoming a symbol of resistance and inspiration for future generations. In 1876, the sky over Washington, D.C. was tinged with a light blue and cloudless blue, reflecting the serenity and hope that permeated the air. That day, the city was taken by a frenzy of expectation. Thousands of people gathered at Parque Lincoln, the pulsating heart of the capital, to witness a long, awaited historical moment. The Monument of Emancipation, a monumental work of stone and bronze, was about to be revealed to the world. It was a symbol of freedom and redemption, a tribute not only to President Abraham Lincoln, but also to the resilience of those who had been in captivity and fought by his own liberation. The event attracted a different multitude, from old enslaved and their descendants to political leaders, abolitionists, Civil War veterans, and ordinary citizens. All were united for a common cause, a desire to honor the lives that had been transformed by the abolition of slavery. The sound of voices and laughs mingled with the tilting of carriages and the murmur of the wind that passed through the old park trees. Between the crowd, Charlotte Scott was standing near the front, his heart throbbing with a mixture of pride and humility. She had traveled from Ohio to be present in this day, his face reflecting the determination that had guided her from childhood to that moment. Charlotte, a woman of imposing presence despite her modest stature, felt small in the face of the magnitude of what she had helped to create, but inside it, there was a deep satisfaction, a sense of mission accomplished. The day was just starting when the formalities began. The inauguration ceremony began with the solemn music of a military band, whose trumpets and drums reverberated in the air, creating an atmosphere of reverence. Soon after, Frederick Douglass, the renowned speaker and abolitionist, was called on stage. His imposing presence and powerful oratory captured the attention of all present. He talked about the importance of the monument as a symbol of hope and progress, but also reminded everyone that the struggle for true equality was far from over. "This monument," said Douglass, his voice echoing clearly, "it is not only a tribute to the great emancipator, but also to those who, like Charlotte Scott, have made this celebration possible. It is a reminder that courage and determination can change the course of history." The crowd applauded warmly, and many eyes turned to Charlotte, who for a brief moment diverted her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She did not seek personal recognition. His only wish was that the sacrifice of so many was not in vain. Finally, the time has come of revelation. The sound of the applause and alive filled the air while the silk cover surrounding the monument was gently pulled, revealing an impressive sculpture. President Lincoln, standing with an expression of contemplation and sobriety, extended a hand over a newly liberated black man who rose from his broken chains. Thomas Ball's work captured not only a moment, but an entire narrative of pain, struggle, and hope. Silence fell over the crowd as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what they saw. The monument, with its bronze figures shining under the morning sun, seemed almost alive, an imposing presence that told the story of a nation in transformation. For Charlotte, that moment was the culmination of years of sacrifice and hard work. She looked around and saw thrilled faces, each carrying their own stories of struggle and resistance. In the eyes of her companions, she saw the same hope that she had guided her from Virginia's cotton fields to the streets of Cincinnati, and now, the country's capital. As the ceremony continued, Charlotte felt a hand land softly on her shoulder. It was a silent gesture of support and recognition, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The presence of friends and allies comforted her, reinforcing the certainty that, despite all the challenges, the fight had been worth it. The Monument of Emancipation was not just a piece of art. It was a living testimony of the human ability to overcome adversity. He represented the strength of an ordinary woman who, with a gesture of generosity, inspired a nation to remember her past and fight for a better future. When the ceremony came to an end, Charlotte remained in the park, watching while people began to disperse. She knew that there was still much to be done, that the struggle for equality would continue. But that day, under the vigilant look of Lincoln and the man released in bronze, Charlotte felt that he had taken an important step towards a world where everyone could walk free and equal. From that day, the Emancipation Monument became a meeting point, a place where people came to reflect on history and renew their commitment to justice. And so, the story of Charlotte Scott, a woman of indomitable courage, continued to inspire generations, reminding everyone that even the simplest acts can have the power to change the world. In a world where the stories of great deeds are often overshadowed by the most grand narratives, the name of Charlotte Scott slowly slid into the shadows of oblivion. However, his legacy persisted, invisible as the deep roots of a majestic tree, supporting and nourishing the continuous struggle for equality and justice. The donation she made, an act of pure self-denial and purpose, was the catalyst for a monument that not only recognized the abolition of slavery, but also became a tangible symbol of the resistance and resilience of a people. Decades after the inauguration of the Emancipation Monument, the streets of Washington, D.C. continued to reverberate with the echoes of civil rights. It was a constant reminder that the freedom gained in the words of the 13th Amendment still needed to be truly lived and felt by all. Abraham Lincoln's bronze sculpture and the freedman remained erected, now partially worn out by time and weather, but still powerful in his message of Esperan, renewed sa. On a silent morning, under the gray sky of the Capitol, a small group of students stopped before the monument. They were there to learn about the story that is often not taught in classrooms, the story of those who, like Charlotte, contributed in ways that time should not erase. The guide, a man of kind voice and looking wise, began to tell them about the life of Charlotte Scott, their struggles, and their unshakable determination. Charlotte Scott's life, he explained, is a lesson about the power of the individual to transform the world around him. She taught us that freedom goes beyond a decree. It is a constant struggle and a memory that must be preserved through generations. The students' eyes widened as the guide spoke, their minds absorbing each word as if they were the air they breathe. They learned that Charlotte not only invested their gains for building a monument, but also planted the seeds of a collective consciousness that would inspire countless movements for justice and equality. At that moment, a young student, Sarah, raised a hesitant hand. "Why didn't we hear more about Charlotte Scott?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone of curiosity and indignation. The guide smiled sadly. "History has its unrecognized heroes and heroines, Sarah. Often, they are those whose contributions are not recorded in the books that really shape the course of the future. But it is up to us to ensure that their voices are not silenced, that their stories are told and retained." The students, touched by this truth, began to discuss with each other how they could honor Charlotte's legacy in their own lives. Inspired, some have decided to research more about forgotten historical figures, while others plan to write articles and organize events in their schools to increase awareness of Charlotte's lasting impact. As the group dispersed, Sarah remained a little more, watching the statue. She imagined Charlotte, a woman of strength and courage, walking through those same streets for so many years. In his mind, Charlotte was not just a historical figure, but a living symbol of resistance and hope. The story of Charlotte Scott, though not widely known, continued to flow like an underground river, feeding the fertile soil of change. It represented the truth that freedom is a flame that must be constantly fed, a responsibility that each generation carries to the next. And so, in every heart she touched, in every mind she inspired, Charlotte Scott's legacy endured. It was a reminder that true freedom does not only reside in the absence of currents, but in the presence of memory and continuous action. Through her actions, she taught us that the struggle for justice is eternal, and that even the simplest acts can have the power to transform the world.